to Making Generative AI Work for Microsoft 365, a tech talk by the very well-regarded industry expert, Tony Redmond. My name is Amar Al-Kari. I'm a product marketing manager at Quest. And before we get started, I wanted to very quickly go through some very basic housekeeping items. So first of all, you all should be muted and with your cameras off. That's totally normal. But first of all, I'd like to invite you throughout the Tech Talk to participate in the session by typing questions in the chat, using reactions, etc., etc. You should be also be able, well, I'll get to that later, but Tony will answer the questions. Tony, this is up to you. Would you like to answer questions at the end during the Q&A session?
Do you want me to be distracted as I talk by looking
Let's
at
not
chat?
then. Yeah, let's not. So we'll answer
Oh,
the
I'm easily
Q&A.
distracted. What can I say?
No, we'll answer all your questions toward the Q&A, but every now and then I do have some support. We have Jason Jacobo, product manager and advisor at Quest, who will be in the chat helping answer questions throughout the presentation as he can. But there will be a full-on Q&A session at the end of the presentation with Tony. Every now and then, I, along with our channel advisor, Katie, will be dropping links to relevant articles and content pieces related to today's topic in the chat, just in case you want to just like a diver deep into the topic. And also, if you guys happen to see the slides at the bottom, we're trying to work that kink out, but there should be, you are able to skip ahead. I recommend not to. There should also be a button that would sync you back to what the presenter is presenting. So, my advice would be just to let things roll out as Tony moves the slides along. Without all that out of the way, again, feel free to participate with questions, put GIFs, any comments into the chat. We more than welcome that. And Tony, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming along today. This session is all about generative artificial intelligence and how it fits into Microsoft 365. We'll be talking about the technology behind Microsoft 365 Copilot, and we'll be discussing some of the big questions that are out there, like, is this useful? Is this something that my organization could do? Can I afford this kind of technology? And so forth and so on. And hopefully we'll have a good time while we're doing it. So I'm Tony Redmond. I'm the editorial director for Practical 365. I hope you guys read Practical 365. We do an awful lot of work on that site to try and bring really interesting articles to you. We welcome all your comments, feedback, ideas for articles, etc. As well as that, I'm the lead author for the Office 365 IT Pros book, which is an electronic book. It comes out every month. It's constantly refreshed, and we do that just to keep up with the changes in Microsoft 365, which, as you guys know, could be 400 or so changes in a tenant every year. So that's me. And now what we're going to talk about is AI. In fact, artificial intelligence is already used extensively across Microsoft 365. Microsoft has been building AI into things like suggested replies, for example, in Outlook and Teams. That uses a very basic form of AI. So we're already using it. The question is how are we going to use it in the future? I believe that this technology is going to exert a big influence. It's going to be a growing influence in how we consume all sorts of technology over the next while. The question is how much it's going to influence Microsoft 365, which is what we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of hype out there. Huge amount of hype. I believe that before you can actually make your mind up about new technology, you've got to understand the new technology. You've got to understand the concepts and the basic operations within that the technology is based on. So that's what we're going to try and discuss as well, right? So here's some definitions just for everybody to get their heads around it. Generative AI is a system capable of generating text. Wow. In response to prompts. Now, there are that's a very simple sentence, but there are actually two very important concepts in there straight off. Firstly, we're talking about generative. This is a technology that's all about generating information. and it generates that information in response to prompts. The prompts come from users who want the AI's help in generating information. The second definition is a much deeper definition, and it talks about all of the things that generative AI is based on. I don't think that you have to really get into it. An interesting thing is that Microsoft has tailored the models that are used inside Microsoft 365 Copilot to make it more suitable for dealing with the kind of information that is stored in Microsoft 365, like documents and messages and so forth and so on. Anyway, you can boil it all down to the discussion about large language models. You boil it all down to one thing. Just think of it as an LLM is a language computer or a language calculator. We have been using number calculators or number computers for years and years and years. They work on, you take a number, you add it to another, you take a bit, and you add it to another bit, eventually get to a byte, etc., etc. An LLM or a language computer works at the same thing, except it's working with language. It's working with words. It's working to figure out what is the next word that's most appropriate in this context. And by figuring out a series of words, we can build up sentences. By building up sentences, you can build up complete paragraphs. By building paragraphs, you can build up a complete answer. And that's basically what an LLM is. It's all about these large models of text that help the AI figure out what is the next most appropriate, best word to use in the context that it's dealing with. Now, AI is absolutely great at generating text, but a lot of the text that you actually see could be characterized as brown, bovine, odor with a very smelly output. Okay, that's just the way it is. This speaks to things. The AI figures out what words are going to be used, but the words might not necessarily make sense. And therefore, you've got to always bear in mind that the human has got to remain in control. And actually, one of the good things about the naming that Microsoft has settled on for Copilot is that Copilot moniker, because it indicates the relationship that the AI has with the human. It's the human should stay in control. The human is the pilot for resolving all this information. Copilot is just there to help you. So you're going to see me refer to Copilot as a kind of assistant, and that's what it is. It's helping people get through work, but the human has to stay in control. If we think about some of the offerings that are out there, range from things like Microsoft Copilot and Edge, right? That's there right now. That's Microsoft's version of Chat GPT. You've got Bing Enterprise Chat. Bing Enterprise Chat is again a version of Copilot in Edge, but it's supposed to take advantage of all of the information inside of an organization. You need Microsoft 365 E5 for this, and it'll go and look at your website. Now, both of these chat-based, browser-based applications, as I say, can come up with interesting ideas. For example, I used Bing Enterprise Chat last night. I said to it, "Okay, I want you to write a PowerShell script for me." I do this quite often just to see what it comes out. Write a PowerShell script to go and get me all of the team's one-to-one chats in the organization and tell me which ones have external participants. And boy, the answer it came back was great. It gave me a wonderfully looking chat or script. Wonderful chat, wonderful script, wonderful code, except it was terribly wrong. Why was it wrong? Well, Bing Enterprise Chat invented a couple of commandlets that don't exist. It just invented them and said, here, use these commandlets, like get CS Teams chat. Doesn't exist at all. But there you go. So that's the thing that you have to remember again is the AI will try to be helpful. That's in its nature, but just beware of what you get back. The big thing on this slide is Microsoft 365 Copilot, which actually becomes generally available tomorrow. Now, Microsoft has been running this in test with many, many customers, all very big customers. Satya Nadella was very careful to say this at the last Microsoft results a week or so ago, when he said that 40% of the Fortune 100 have been using Copilot with Microsoft 365 or Microsoft 365 Copilot. And he also made this remark is that, oh, all of our customers have told us that they can't consider working without Copilot anymore, which is kind of interesting. I wonder what kind of the reactions that have been reported to Satya, because certainly some of the reactions I've received from customers who are participating in this preview have been, let's say, it's slightly different. But anyway, we'll go on. There are other Copilot solutions. There's Windows, it's going to be built into Windows 11. There's Security Copilot, which is a very interesting one from a perspective of making sense of a whole pile of security logs where the fingerprints of threat might be lurking in an obscure log file or hidden in such a way that it is difficult for a human to parse it out. But this is, AI it's in its seventh heaven here when it's given a whole pile of log files to go look for because it's just what it's good at. And then again, we're just going to see AI applied liberally across the entire Microsoft 365 ecosystem. An interesting one, an example I've listed here is Entra ID governance is a identity governance add-on or solution, which wants to sell you an add-on to Azure AD Premium P1, an extra $7 a month to find people in closer proximity to other people in organizational terms. What does that mean? Well, you're deemed to be in closer proximity if you're in a department that works in the same building or in the same country or whatever. It's whether or not that's worth $7 a month is anybody's. Well, that's an argument you can have. Anyway, let's go on and talk about what's in Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is the bulk of the remainder of this session. So, Copilot, the major point. This is an orchestration service. Orchestration means that it's telling other bits, other technology components, what they have to do to come up with an answer for a customer. So we have the UIs that are built into Microsoft 365 apps like Teams, like the Office apps, like Outlook. We have Graph APIs, which are essential because they allow Copilot to get access to all the information that it needs to parse to come up with a reasonable answer to the user question. And then you've got the generative API. You've got things like the large language models, and you've got retrieval-based augmentation or RAG, which is what the optimization that's been done for dealing with kind of Office documents. Copilot uses information that's accessible to the graph. So this means that information has got to be stored inside Microsoft 365. If information is stored outside of Microsoft 365, it's inaccessible to the graph and therefore can't be used by Copilot. As we'll see later, there are things called graph connectors that will bring information into the graph. It actually makes it available to Microsoft Search, and that's a way of introducing external information. But the basic rule here is that if information isn't available to a graph API, that it can't be consumed by Copilot. Now, if you're unsure about what the AI help looks like in Office apps, there's a link I've put in here, which is actually to LinkedIn Learning. They have a first look at Copilot apps. And it's a useful way of looking to say, oh, okay, this is how it works in Word. This is how it works in Excel. This is how it works in Outlook and whatever. It's just a good way of getting a visual picture in your head about how Copilot works without having to go and install it and everything. So here's another way of looking at it. Other components that come along. You've got Microsoft 365 Chat. We talked about Bing Enterprise Chat. Well, Microsoft 365 Chat is like Bing Enterprise Chat, except that you get access to all of the Microsoft 365 data as well. The semantic index is a really important component. this is, if you think of Microsoft Search, which people use classically today to go look for documents in SharePoint or OneDrive or exchange messages, that search is basically keyword-based search. You say, go find me documents relating to Project Contoso or whatever. Go find me stuff that I did last month. All keyword-based search. Very classic. Same type of thing you do with Google or Bing outside of Microsoft 365. The semantic index extracts information from the data that's stored inside Microsoft 365 repositories and makes it available in such a way that it makes it easier for Copilot to consume. So, for example, if you take a large document, it will extract important pieces of that document and put it in its index. And that makes it much easier to find stuff in response to a user prompt, a user query that perhaps isn't very accurately phrased, as we'll come to that later on. And then you've got all the apps that is there. Now, the big thing I'm going to point out here is that Copilot will only be available for the Monarch client for Outlook. Monarch is the new Outlook. It's the one Outlook to rule them all, if you will. Microsoft is working on this. It wants to get rid of the old Win32 version of Outlook. It's difficult to upgrade, difficult to change the UI, and it's difficult to innovate on. And it's logical. I mean, Outlook's been around for 26 years. That's what happens to old software. It becomes like old presenters like me, cranky and difficult to work with. So Microsoft is saying very clearly that the only way you're going to be able to use Copilot in an Outlook environment is to use the new Monarch client. That's something that people are just going to have to get on with. Okay, let's move forward. I don't need to. The promise that Microsoft is making to customers is that use Copilot. It'll make better use of information already there. The information is in Microsoft 365. It's available to users. We're going to make better use of that information. It's going to generate better output. The output is going to be more concise. It's going to be better written. It can be summarized. Yeah, that's probably true. And it's going to help people to exploit application features that are available, but people just don't know how to use. I think Excel is probably the best example of this, maybe Word. Both of these applications are tremendously feature rich. And you just have to go down through all of the various menus and sub-menus. You'll find things there. And the way that Outlook, or the way the Copilot can help people is that if you say, I want information to be formulated in such a way, it will go and do that. You won't have to know about how to replicate the steps that Copilot took to produce, for example, a pivot table. It will just go and produce that pivot table for you. So that's the promise that's there. And, you know, in most cases, that's what actually gets delivered. In terms of licenses, access, you've got to have a Microsoft 365 Copilot SKU, a product. That's what's going to be made generally available tomorrow. Initially, Microsoft will say that you've got to buy at least 300 of these licenses. You can't go and say, do a small test with 25. You've got to buy 300. If you buy them through a partner, that partner is going to have to get approval from Microsoft Sales to actually sell those Copilot licenses to you. Anyway, that's the first thing. You've got to have a Copilot license. Next thing, Copilot licenses are useless unless they're applied to an eligible base license. And an eligible base license, Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 for the enterprise, and Business Standard and Business Premium for the small to medium segments. Okay. I got to say that this is a deliberate licensing strategy taken by Microsoft. They could have made Copilot available for Office 365 E3. They could have made it for Office 365 E5. There is nothing in Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 that makes them any different, gives them any secret juice that allows them to go and run Copilot. This is a deliberate marketing ploy by Microsoft to force customers to upgrade. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, once you have licenses, you can create the semantic index. This is a process that runs on eligible tenants, and it prepares Microsoft Search. It extends it, as I said, with things like those document extracts, etc. A licensed user can use Copilot everywhere. There's no particular block. You can't say, well, you can only use Copilot in Outlook, but you can't use it in Word and PowerPoint. No, that's not the way it works. Copilot is everywhere. It's Copilot for Microsoft 365. It's not Copilot for Exchange. It's not Copilot for SharePoint. It's Copilot across the entire suite. Okay, and we talked about Outlook before, so let's go on. So common use cases. This is where I think these are the kind of environments where I think Copilot is most effective. And you can see here there's something starting, a trend starting. It's when people have repetitive information, repetitive tasks. The output of those repetitive tasks have been stored in OneDrive or SharePoint or Exchange. They're available to Copilot. So, for example, I'm a salesperson. I need to generate a sales pitch to Contoso.com. Well, because I've got sales pitches that I have done to 14 other customers, they're available. Copilot can go and generate that sales pitch very easily. Could Copilot do that if the information was not stored in SharePoint or OneDrive? Absolutely not. So things like sales pitches, product overviews, job descriptions, performance reviews. Hey, I would have died for this when I was running a large software organization, because performance reviews once a year, having to do 200 of them, absolutely horrible. Copilot could help you there. Again, it's a repetitive kind of task. Next thing, refining text. So I've generated an email, I've generated a document, make it more business friendly. Maybe I'm not very good at speaking English. Maybe I'm not very good at speaking German. I definitely am very good at speaking German. But Copilot can take text and it can refine it and make it better. Creating summaries. This is one area where for a meeting like this, Copilot really scores big time, because it can take the transcript generated by Teams and can summarize it. So all the stuff I'm talking about here, Copilot can take it and summarize it in a set of bullet points that people can read after the meeting, as part of the meeting recap or whatever, and say, oh, I now understand what happened during this meeting. Tony talked a lot. Tony kept on talking. We couldn't stop Tony talking, but he covered a lot about Microsoft 365 Copilot. And that, when you think about it, is a pretty useful kind of thing to have, because there's a lot of meetings you go to and you walk out of and say, what actually happened there? I know I've done that a lot over my career, and Copilot can help with that. And then also reformat information. For example, take a Word document and make it a PowerPoint presentation. All of this, really good stuff, and all of it Copilot can do. So how does all this happen? Well, this is where you get this orchestration between Copilot, the semantic index, the large language models, and your data. Because you're the user, you're in Word or your Excel or whatever, you click the Copilot button, Copilot says, well, what do you want me to do? At that stage, you're generating a prompt, and a prompt is a directive to Copilot. It tells Copilot what you want it to do. And as we'll see later, it's really important that users are educated how to build good prompts. We'll come back to that. Anyway, let's assume that you can build a good prompt. You can tell Copilot exactly what you want. Copilot takes, Copilot takes that prompt and grounds it. Grounds it means that it's going to go and look for backend information. It's going to the graph. It's going to fetch information. You've asked it about Wingross toy supplies or whatever. What do I know about toy supplies? What's available to me that I can use to answer this question? And that's where the semantic index really comes into play, because the semantic index will help Copilot navigate all the information that's stored in the graph to find stuff that it can process. When Copilot has finished finding Sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to have a. Thanks. When Copilot has found all that information, it sends it off to the large language models for processing. And this sequence could be back and forwards many times until Copilot is happy that it's got enough information to respond to the prompt, and then it sends it back to the app. And the app displays whatever the output is to the user. Now, very importantly, the foundational, what they call the foundational LLMs, the large language models, they are not trained on your organizational data. Microsoft has got quite enough data to train its large language models. It doesn't need your data. Your data is not used to help other tenants or other people within your tenant. That just doesn't happen. This is another way of looking at it. And you can see the flow here. The interesting thing is that if you have some of these graph connectors, the graph connectors will be taking in data from an external source, and they will flow into the indexes maintained by search, and so become available to Copilot that way. So the big news, which of course you all know, is that search against Microsoft 365 repositories is absolutely vital. If you can't go to search, SharePoint search or whatever, and find information, Copilot won't be able to find that information either. So one of the big things that any organization needs to do, any organization considering the use of Copilot has got to do, is figure out, is its search in good shape? Some of that might be that the information isn't well categorized. Some of it might be that the information is too open to access. We'll come back to that. Some of it is that there may be gaps in the information that has been stored because we've still got a whole pile of stuff on file servers, or we've still got a whole pile of stuff on on-premises SharePoint, which isn't accessible to Microsoft search in the cloud. So you got to think about it. Sorry, it's got to be a really fundamental goal for anybody thinking about Copilot is to make sure that search works as well as it can within your Microsoft 365 tenant. Now, speaking about search brings me into this thing of leakage. When Delve came out, those of you who were running tenants at that stage, you might remember that there was a whole hoo-ha. People say, oh my God, Delve is showing users documents they should never see. And that certainly happened, but it wasn't the software's fault. The problem was entirely due to poor management within the tenant, insofar as protections that were placed on SharePoint sites allowed Delve to highlight a document to a user. The basic rule is if I can get to it, if permissions don't stop me getting to it, then that information is fair game. I can consume it. Now, we're moving to a slightly different point here because Delve only suggested documents, said, look at all these documents. Wow. Have a great time. Look at those documents, see what's interesting, and use them as you want. Copilot consumes documents. So it's not just a case of finding out, oh gosh, Delve has highlighted a couple of documents nobody should see. Copilot in the background could be consuming those documents and using their content to generate answers for user queries. So this speaks again to the need to get search right. If you don't get search right, and you have, for example, excessive sharing going on in the organization, you have people running a whole pile of sites that are open and public to everybody, then you could have a problem. We had a query in Practical 365 a couple of weeks ago. Somebody said, I've noticed that we've a whole pile of teams that are set up for public access. And this is great because it allows people to join those teams as they want. And maybe that's what you want. But because a team is public, it means that its SharePoint site is public. When a SharePoint site is public, because Copilot can get to that information. Anything that's in that site, it's fair game to Copilot. So there was a request of, how do I deal with this? And one easy way is to run a script to turn most of those sites into privates, or most of those teams into private teams. But there are other things like thinking about information protection to make sure that that your sites, if they've got really confidential information, use sensitivity labels that encrypt the information and protect it against unauthorized access. Another thing would be to use sensitivity labels for container management to make sure that if a site is set to be private, that it stays private. So there are all of these things that are based around the single thought, which is how well does search function within my Microsoft 365 tenant? If search doesn't work well, if search reveals information, reveals results that you don't expect, then you're going to have an unhappy time with Copilot. Some points that flow from that. Where does Copilot processing happen? Well, the Azure OpenAI service is currently available in the US and Europe. It'll spread around the world. Microsoft has been very, very careful to say that for European customers, that Copilot respects the EU data boundary. Data does not go outside the European Union. And there is the direct quote from him. Any LLM calls, which remember, we've created a prompt. The prompt has been grounded. It's got some information. We've sent that information to the LLM. That's the customer data. It's processed in memory and returned the response. And anything else that goes back, it goes back in the home region. It doesn't go outside. It doesn't go from the US to Europe or vice versa. Other things, offline access. Can I use Copilot offline? Nope, you can't. Because you need to have that ability to go and access data and correspond with the LLMs. Compliance. How will this affect compliance? Well, we already talked a little bit about sensitivity labels. DLP can also be helpful in terms of stopping oversharing within an organization. So that's a thing to definitely think about. Auditing, we don't know yet. We don't have enough information yet. It's still a very early phase in Copilot's development. But I'll be looking for things like, can I audit who is generating Copilot prompts? Can I audit where those prompts are processed and so forth and so on? And so far, we don't have a lot to report there. But I suspect that's just a symptom of being in preview. Okay. After all that, rubbish in means rubbish out. In other words, we're now moving to the quality of data that you give Copilot to process, because it's your data that it's processing. And if your data is rubbish, it's not going to magically transform into wonderful, sparkling, up-to-date information that's absolutely 100% accurate. Rubbish in very much means rubbish out. The quality of user prompts is key. If a user asks for, it's like, think about this. If you go and have a chat with somebody on a train or a bus, and you ask them a question, and you don't ask them a very well phrased question, you ask them an indistinct question, one that could be answered in very different ways. Well, the responses that you get back are probably not going to be very good. In the same way, we're now using conversational AI. So we've got to be very precise about what we want from Copilot. We've got to formulate that precision in these prompts that go in. And it's almost as if you have a human assistant sitting beside you, and you are telling that assistant exactly what you want. Because let's face it, this human assistant is not too clever. They're not going to make up, they're not going to read between the lines. They're not going to make up what they think you want. So you've got to tell them stuff that's very specific and detailed. You've got to tell them where the context is going to, what type of documents Copilot should consider. and take out as much room for interpretation as possible. You got to tell them what type of output you want. And if you could do that, then you're going to get a better output. And indeed, one of the more interesting things I've seen from Microsoft recently is this notion of a Copilot prompt lab, which is online and allows people to actually go and see what kind of prompts are best used in certain circumstances. So this is a real learning that people are going to have. And a thing that strikes me is that 25 years or so after Google came along and transformed the relationship that people have with search technology, I still see people really struggling to formulate basic keyword prompts, searches, whatever. They'll go and say, okay, I'll search for Microsoft 365. I'll search for Office 365. I'll search for Copilot. These are all keyword-based searches, but they will throw it in such a way that they'll get back 692,000 results. And now they're at the mercy of the Google search algorithm in terms of the ranking to say which one is best. And that might not necessarily be the case. So just in the same way that some people do really well with Google searches or Bing searches, other people do badly. And it all comes back to maybe knowledge, showing people how to do things the right way. And so once again, the message that's coming off this slide loud and clear is, if you're interested in Copilot, you are going to have to set aside time for users to master searches, to master these prompts, master the art of instructing the AI exactly what it should do. So another thing then we have to think about is these foundational LLMs that Microsoft has delivered. They tell Copilot how to process information, but the source information comes from you. It's your data. So one thing I'd be asking users is, sorry, how good is that source information? How accurate is that information? Do you have inaccurate? Do you have bad information? Do you have all the information you need inside Microsoft 365? And I think when I look at how people organize information, there are some folks that are really good, and there's some folks who are really horrible. The good folks, the people who do a good job, for example, of keeping the information they have online up to date, they'll probably, sorry. Oh my God, try and do a presentation when you got a cold is always good for it. Anyway, the people who have good information online, the people who they keep their information up to date, they throw away old stuff, whatever, they'll do much, much better than the folks who just dump everything into Exchange or SharePoint or OneDrive. Because the danger exists that when Copilot is going to go and look for something, it'll find information that's inaccurate, out of date, misleading, just plain wrong. And it will use it. And then that speaks to, if that information gets into the output derived by Copilot, users have got to be really, really careful about checking the output to make sure it meets their needs and is accurate, because it is the user's responsibility for what they send or what they put in a document. The AI finds the information, it presents the information, it puts the information into the document, but it's the user who's responsible for when that information goes out publicly. That's another big training need, is to make sure that people do that. Here's just the thing that strikes me about this is that and there's the link I have on this slide. It talks about the quality of writing that comes out, the quality of the output. ChatGPT, all of these LLM-based models are really, really good about taking large quantities of information and boiling it down to simple text output. Whether or not the output is correct is one thing, but whether or not the output is actually good is another. Whether, it will be competent, it will be it will be accurate generally in kind of grammar terms or whatever, but whether or not the quality of the information that is presented by the AI is usable by a human being who wants to really impress their customer, their manager, or whatever, that's a totally different matter. And I think that's another thing you've got to get across to users is that, okay, the AI Copilot, absolutely fantastic at starting off something. Draft me a message for something. Okay, I'll draft you that. Draft me a document about that. Yep, I'll do that. But look at that information. And look at that information that's come back and say to yourself, could I have written this better? Can I write it better now once I've done this first draft? I think, for example, that Copilot will be really good at helping people, perhaps who are not they're not used to writing business memos. They're not used to writing product pitches. They're not used to writing product plans or whatever. It'll give them a fantastic help at starting, at getting going. But the business of refining to get an output that is really good, that is really accurate, really meets the bar in terms of quality, that could be a different matter. And it all comes down to, the information in the document in that Copilot is dealing with. Content degrades over time. I often said this about blogs. You read a blog online. If that blog is older than 3 months, it's likely to contain inaccuracies, right? It's the same thing if you depend on a whole pile of documents that you've accumulated over the last 10 years. How many of those documents are actually up to date? How many of them are accurate? How many of them contain flaws that you might not even recognize? But Copilot will take that and use that information as output. So coaching users about quality is really, really important as well. Here's an example. So TEC, the experts conference. There's a group of us that work on it. We have different ways of storing information, and we've taken these two fictional people, Jennifer and Jacob. Jennifer keeps all of her information about the project in Word documents that she's got on network shares. Jacob stores all the stuff in OneDrive and SharePoint Inline. If they were to go to Copilot and say, go generate me a product plan or a project plan or a review or whatever about a particular project, they will get very, very different results. They might not even realize that there is that much difference until they share that information with other people, in which case the information that comes from Jennifer will be much less rich and less complete than the information that comes from Jacob. So once again, you've got to store stuff in Microsoft 365 to make it available. Of course, we've seen lots and lots of demos from Microsoft. And the thing I would say to you, I don't want to degrade these demos, but I will say to you that any of the demos I've seen have been given by people who know the technology, and they have rehearsed, and they know how to interact with Copilot. They know how to create these really well formulated prompts. And behind the scenes, the data that they're dealing with has been specially curated and formulated and put in place to maximize the benefits of Copilot. Okay, I just ask yourself, when you go into any of these projects, in the real world, are your users as perfect as those presenters? Is their data as perfect as those presenters use? And the answer probably is Not so much. And this is one of the things I think that's coming out in the preview pilots that are going on right now. Some users take to Copilot like a dream and have an absolutely wonderful experience, and others don't. Okay, so again, training. So we think about training. Okay, Microsoft 365, I said earlier, right at the get-go, multiple examples of intelligent features. So you got predictive text and all the rest of it. Even those simple features generate errors. An example that I've got here, I hit this error myself. Word inserted the wrong word. It did undermines versus underpins. Now, the only person to blame for that is me because I use these words a lot. And the model that Word created for how I interact with text said, oh, undermines is a word that Tony uses a lot. So therefore, after I type under, UNDER, it must be undermines. And there we go, automatic insertion. I caught that one. I caught that error. But sometimes I haven't caught errors. And we all know this from autocorrect in chat-based apps like WhatsApp or whatever, where you embarrass yourself by sending out information that isn't exactly what you intended to do. This happens. It's the AI thinks it's got things right. According to its rules, according to this language calculator that it is, the word that it's chosen is the right word based on the context, based on all the information I have. That is absolutely the right word. Comes back, it's the user's problem because they've got to check things. I talked a little bit about graph connectors earlier on. Organizations can go, and we'll see a lot of these type of connectors come out because it's a very good way for a third party who has a valuable source of information to go and build either a plugin or a graph connector to bring stuff in. And the difference between the two is that if you build a graph connector, it's kind of static. It brings stuff in, puts it into search. It's available in the same way as you can search for anything else. If you build a plugin, the plugin allows a more dynamic interaction with the underlying data set. So I think you're going to see a lot of this come about over the next while. People often say to me, hey, Tony, you're a bit down on this. GitHub Copilot, it's really brilliant. Microsoft says, what, 52, 53% increase in programmer productivity using GitHub Copilot. And yeah, I get this. But there are fundamental differences. When you're writing computer code, you have to follow structure. If you don't follow structure, your code doesn't work. Programmers, the consumers, they know good code when they see it. If GitHub Copilot produces rubbish, the programmers will understand that it's rubbish very quickly. At the end of the day, compilers impose quality controls. If the code can't compile, it's rubbish. And the very fundamental one, which even PowerShell has to come up with, is the code either works or it doesn't. None of these kind of tests, if you will, for quality apply for Microsoft 365 Copilot because we're dealing with much fuzzier sources of information. A document is a much fuzzier source of information than a previously written program or a previously written script, right? So that's the reason why the success for something like GitHub Copilot can't be automatically assumed to happen inside Microsoft 365 Copilot. Okay, let's talk a little bit about cost of all of this. You've decided you're going to do it, so what are we going to have to do? So the first thing is you're going to have to pay for all of this expensive processing that goes in the background. And this is the reason why Microsoft charges Copilot licenses at $30 a month per user. I've heard from some people that resolving a user prompt, takes 10 times more computing resource than an average search. So if you do a Microsoft search, you go to SharePoint search, you look for some documents, that's 1x If you go to Copilot and you do the same type of prompt for some documents that you want to use to create another document, let's say 10 times. And that's easy to see how that would be, because there's a whole pile of computation going on here to actually resolve what the user has put in, find the contextual documents that are needed, sending them off to the LLM, getting information back to the LLM, and then outputting it. It's a lot of work. It's interesting. The Wall Street Journal last month it reported that Microsoft is losing $20 a month with GitHub Copilot, just because of all of the processing cost. So maybe Microsoft's $30 a month is the right price point, given the amount of processing that's required. And it's interesting is that Microsoft is spending literally billions, 10.7 billion in Q4 of their last fiscal year was set aside for preparing their data centers for Copilot. So lots of money. And as I said earlier, a minimum of 300 licenses now if you want to start a Copilot implementation. We talked about the cost of licenses, the eligible licenses. I see a spelling mistake here, which is never good. Anyway, so you're going to see Microsoft 365 E3 or E5. That's the basic entry point for enterprises. Now, for years and years and years, Office 365 E3 has been the basic enterprise license that's used out in the cloud. We're now being asked to make a huge upward upgrade just to get to the point where you can then pay the $30 a month. So this is the thing you've got to think about. How much extra recurring costs? There are going to be discounts. I anticipate that you have a discussion with your Microsoft sales rep. You'll get lots of discounts. But remember that you're adding all these costs to your recurring baseline that will eventually kick in when all those discounts expire. So think about it like that. You're going to see lots of incentives. Microsoft will put out a good case for upgrading to Microsoft 365 E3 or E5. I don't degrade them in any way. I mean, if you want to bundle in and get Microsoft Windows 11, you get Defender for Endpoint, you get Azure AD Premium, you get enhanced Purview compliance, you get all these things, which individually will cost money. So if you're in the market, you think that you can actually use all these extra features, go for it. It's great. It's a nice bundle to have. Okay. But then think about it. Are you going to upgrade everybody in the organization or only selected users? And if there's only going to be selected users, how are you going to say to one user that, hey, you're going to be left in Office 365 E3, your buddy over here is going to get Microsoft 365 E5 plus Copilot? Are you really saying to that person that other guy's work is more important to the organization than yours? It's a kind of a difficult area to navigate. Microsoft talks about justifying the cost. It says, it's only $1 a user per year, or $1 a day per user. And it's actually more than that. It works out at about 163. And you could say, okay, will that be will I get that money back? I think you probably will with some of the folks that we talked about earlier. Salespeople that generate sales proposals, and today it takes them an hour to generate a sales proposal for a new customer. If they can do that now in 15 minutes with Copilot, it's your money back straight away. Absolutely. But I think you've got to think about how do you measure the return, and how do you measure the return for the overall business and for individual departments or individual users, right? Because you are going to spend a lot of money here. And if you, maybe you've got that money to burn, that's fine. But most people, when they go to the well and say, I need 300 users for Copilot, it's going to cost $30 a month, it's 100 grand, 108 grand a year. What am I going to get back for that? Got to have answers. At the end of it all, Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's an AI assistant. That's all it is. It's not a replacement for the intelligence that people have already. In some cases, people will do better than Copilot. Myself, I think I'll always be able to write better than Copilot. I don't have that need for somebody to set me off and tell me how to write a document, write an article, or whatever. But I may be in a minority here. But the important thing I'm saying here is that have an idea why your organization needs Copilot. It's not just because it's technology. It's all it is an AI assistant. Go back to that LinkedIn learning course. Have a look about have a look at the tasks that they illustrate Copilot be using and say, okay, is that for us? It's very helpful to that. The second thing is that the AI, Copilot, will not make collaboration any better inside your organization because collaboration comes about through people interacting with each other. Copilot might help certainly in things like understanding what happens inside Teams meetings, but is that going to be any better for your collaboration? I don't know. I don't think so. And that comes to the big question. Does your organization need Microsoft 365 Copilot? I don't know. I don't know your organizations. I do think this is a very, very difficult and hard question to solve. I think it's going to need a lot of research in many organizations. It's going to need some championing. It's going to need user training. It's going to need some preparation. It's going to need some infrastructure work and things like sharing and getting stuff across so that all the data is inside Microsoft 365 and you got all the connectors and whatever. Okay. So at the end of the day, here are the takeaways. I think if you think that your organization should use Microsoft 365 Copilot and you think that you would benefit from it, then do this. Decide who in the organization is going to get the benefit. Decide what success looks like and how you're going to measure it. Write it down. Communicate it to management and communicate it to users. Train your users. Make sure they understand how to engage in this conversational AI communication so that will lead to generation of all these results. Don't leave users just try things out. Tell users about their responsibilities. Make sure they understand that anything that goes out under their name is their responsibility. If they take information from a confidential document that Copilot has found due to, a lapse in sharing and inserts that information into the document and they send it to a customer, it's their problem, not the AI's problem. Finally, make sure that all of the information is inside Microsoft 365. The golden rule is that if it's not inside Microsoft 365, that data is inaccessible to Copilot, can't be used by Copilot. Okay, that's all I had to say. I don't know. What are we going to do now? We're going to have a look at some of these questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tony, for that great presentation. I know we are technically at time, but again, Tony, if you're available to stay, which is great, you can answer some questions. Again, you guys should be getting a recording of this whole presentation as well as the deck afterwards, and obviously that would include the Q&A. So we can get started. So Tony, since go ahead.
Let me take some of these things. Okay. How much additional time is needed by administrators to manage Copilot? I don't think administrators are going to notice it. License management, that's about it.
Well, here, Tony, I actually have them written in order of when they.
Oh, you have them in order. Okay.
I do. I have them stored. I'll just read through. So since Copilot for 365 has a 300 seat minimum, have you physically used the product?
I have used the product. Yes, I've used it in a preview organization. Yeah.
Okay. How about working with other languages, which are not so common?
So I believe the plan of record is that Copilot is going to appear first in the major languages, what Microsoft 365 calls major languages, because that's English, German, Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, Chinese, Japanese. I believe it's something like that. And then gradually over time, as Microsoft develops the large language models for those particular languages, it will become available in other languages. So it's going to take time before you're going to see total coverage for all of the languages supported by Microsoft 365, because today I think that number is well over 100, maybe 140. So it's just going to take time.
Sure. Is Copilot available for education?
Well, right now you've seen that the only eligible plans are Microsoft 365 E3 and E5. There's been no mention of A3 and A5, which are the educational plans. I think Microsoft at the moment sees a couple of things. Firstly, they've made a huge investment. Secondly, they got to get the money back on that investment. Third, education doesn't pay the kind of big bucks that the enterprise pays. So the first target is the enterprise, the people that will pay the $30 a month.
Got it. Are Copilot licenses included in E3/E5? Is it an add-on SKU?
It's an add-on SKU. There's no Copilot included in E3 or E5.
If we have created anonymous guest links in SharePoint online sites for sharing documents, these documents show even if the user does not have access to the site?
I think you're going to have to test that. The basic rule, I'll come back to my basic rule. If you can find something with Microsoft Search or SharePoint Search, then it's available to Copilot. So it's easy to test.
Got it. Give me 1 second, Tony. I'm going to send the questions to Katie. It seems like my voice is fading in and out, and she can read them off.
Okay.
Okay, Katie, you should have gotten the questions in a separate chat. Can you just read them off for me?
Starting at the top.
Yes, these are all. Yeah, I already deleted the ones we covered.
Sure. Will BCE and Copilot only generate from the enterprise content, or is it able to combine with the public content, thus retrieve from everywhere, including enterprise O365 tenant, enrich LLM with enterprise content only in boundary of the O365 tenant?
So BCE deals with external content that's out there on the internet, because it's very much like the chat models that are available with ChatGPT 4. And whereas Microsoft 365 Copilot is much more focused on the Microsoft 365 data. So I haven't seen it drag in stuff from external sites. I think you're going to be limited to whatever you've got inside your own organization.
Okay, thank you.
What is the difference? I need to test that now that somebody's asked. Just great question.
What is the difference between Team Premium and Teams Copilot?
Teams Premium allows you to have access to different functions and features within Teams, such as, for example, on-demand translation during team meetings for captions during team meetings. And Copilot is just it's an add-on that's built into Teams, then that will do things such as, say, take the transcript from a Teams meeting and summarize it, or take a stream of chats and summarize that. They're two completely different sets of functionality.
Can I use Purview to set permissions on data that is consumed and indexed?
Which part of Purview are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, because Purview could be anything from, information barriers, which is an area that's another thing that's just popped up in my mind. I got to go and research that, the impact of Purview information barriers. So I'm wondering what sorry, what kind of Purview are you talking? What type of Purview are you talking about? Because I don't know.
Let me see.
So just a question I see at the end, does the Teams Copilot need the meeting to be recorded? Absolutely, it depends on the transcript. So if you don't record a meeting, transcript isn't available and Purview can and Copilot can't do its thing. Will Copilot be available for Power Apps? There is a Copilot for Power Apps, and so far I don't think it needs a separate license. Don't know. Oh, there you go. There's the answer to the initial language support: English, Spanish, Japanese, French, German, Portuguese, Italian, Chinese simplified. Hey, I got that right. And there's the ones that are coming, things like Arabic, Chinese traditional, Czech, Danish, Dutch, Finnish, Hebrew, Hungarian, Korean, Norwegian, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Swedish, Thai, Turkish, and Ukrainian. Wow. Okay.
Do you have time for a couple more questions? I know
Yeah,
we're about
yeah,
almost
yeah.
10. Okay.
I know. There's still a lot of people in the room, so
Yeah, we still have quite a big audience. It was mentioned that Copilot indexes information. If Copilot once had access to information, does it index it and able to return a response based upon that information, even if the permissions change down the road?
okay. So there's two sources. You've got Microsoft Search, and then you got the semantic index. I think there is security trimming that goes on, and that's based, I believe, on Microsoft Search. So the set of documents available to Copilot comes from Microsoft Search and then goes to the semantic index to get extra information about it. So the security trimming, which applied to Microsoft Search, which is based on the permissions on sites, will make sure that the documents that go to Copilot respect whatever the current security boundaries are within the organization. I think I got that right. It's the same as security trimming that goes on for any SharePoint search.
Okay. Sorry, I was just trying to get the live link for the upcoming Tech Talk.
It's good comments here. For content arrest, Microsoft 365 Copilot can only access cloud documents. Yeah, I've said that time and time again. For content in use, the document's location does not matter. If the document is opened by the user, Copilot can access the contents. That's correct. If you are working inside a document and you actually have that document available or saved to your local PC, Copilot has access to it. That's because it's working within the context of that document. So it becomes part of the information, if you will, that's transmitted to the LLM to deal with. Yep, that's true.
Okay. I'll just go through a couple more. I have one. So most of our teams are. Huh?
Sorry, I just see this one. Well, I just see what's
Okay,
kind of interesting. If once Copilot consumes data, will it remain available if the original source is deleted? Well, remember we're talking about seconds, so it doesn't take all that long for Copilot to find information, consume it, and then send it back to the user. So I guess you could get into a bit of a race condition where somebody has got a document, they've stored it in SharePoint, it's got fairly wide access. They look at the document and say, oh, I hate that. I'm going to rewrite that from scratch, and they're going to delete it. And in the time that they're thinking about deleting it, Copilot has taken that information and sent it back to another user that's queried about the same comment. Yeah, that's possible, but will that be a thing that's really important in practical sense? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. It's not going to pick up deleted documents, by the way. If a document has been deleted and it's in the preservation whole library or it's in the recycled bin, then as far as Copilot is concerned, it can't use those documents. Any others? Katie, you got?
It's like there's, yeah.
Okay, somebody has already looked at information barriers, which is good. Information Copilot honors any information barriers in place. Good, good. See, this is the value of collaboration, which I thought it's not Copilot that's making this collaboration happen. It's actually people asking questions and thinking about information. So this is good.
Okay. Well, I think we can just wrap it up now.
Okay.
If just because we're already over, and I know we're have people dropping,
Yeah,
but
you've all got
yeah,
important things to do.
I know.
I know.
But the recording will be sent out. Typically takes probably within the week. You can expect an email. I can also send out the deck. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your dedicated sales rep if you have one, or you can reach out to me directly if you need some guidance on who to reach out to. But thank you so much for joining. We did put a link in the chat for our next Tech Talk, which will be on Thursday. So keep an eye out for that, and then you'll get an email with that as well. So you should have all the information that you need. And thank you so much, Tony. You were funny as always and informative as always.
And I had a cough, not as always. But thanks very much for coming, guys. I wish you all the success in the world with your Copilot projects. If you decide to go along the way, just do the training, do the preparation, and you'll get the results.
Right. Well, thank you again for everybody who attended today, and keep an eye out on your email. You will be getting this information there as well. Have a good day, everybody.